Hello, everyone. This is the third episode of the More Important Than Physics podcast, the podcast of the David Bohm Society. Today, we will be speaking with a board member about dialogue, amongst other things. Howard has been a board member for almost a decade. I couldn't locate the exact date he joined, but if I had to guess more exactly, I'd probably say 8 years ago or so. And I hope you enjoy listening to today's episode. So Howard, I would like you to start with kind of a brief biography of yourself. If you could tell us maybe your full name, what year you were born, where you live, kind of your general life experience before you encountered the work of Bohm and Krishnamurti, and how you encountered the work of Bohm and Krishnamurti.
Well, I was born in 1950, a nice, easy year to remember how old I am. So I'm 74, going to be 75 this year. The story I usually tell is when I was in college, I was reading Socrates, and I was pretty impressed with this fellow. And he mentioned this thing called know thyself, and I thought that was pretty interesting. But at the time, I was pretty busy with pursuing a musical career. I tried to be a rock star. So a number of years later, about 12 years, I had gotten a family and a couple of kids and a house and a car, and I had some leisure times, and this question popped up again that I apparently had been lodged into my head of know thyself. So I said, well, how do you do that? So I found one book that didn't really resonate, and it was called The Science of Becoming Oneself, but it didn't work. Then I found this in the back of a jazz guitar book, some suggested reading. And part of it was music, and part of it seemed to be spiritual related topics. And there was two there by somebody named J. Krishnamurti. So I went to the bookstore that I thought might have this kind of book. And I went there, and they didn't have the two recommended titles, but they had one called Freedom from the Known. Now here I have to insert something before I tell you the quote that I read in this book on the fifth paragraph. A few years prior to that, when my daughter was 1 year old, she was crying, and I said something rather stupid to my wife about, let her cry. And about a minute later, it literally felt like some sort of light went off in my head saying, "You're clueless as a father." And so I rushed out to the bookstore to get some parenting books. And then I started noticing not only did I not know much about parenting, but I didn't know much about anything else outside of music. So then back to the Freedom from the Known book, and the fifth paragraph, Krishnamurti said something like, "You're all waiting for someone to give you the answers. You're all secondhand people." So that pointed directly to my discovery that I didn't know much about anything except for what other people had told me. So, and as I read on in this book, it was just continually pointing out, my behavior and my, the way that I was living. And so I had found the right book, and then I began to purchase all of the books that I could get my hands on. And then I turned over one of the books, and there was a little tiny picture of Krishnamurti, and underneath it said Ojai. So I didn't know where that was. It turned out it was in the same county where I live. And so I was like, oh, I can drive there. So I drove up to Ojai, and I went to the school, and I didn't see anybody, so I was kind of yelled out, "Is Krishnamurti here?" And somebody peeked around a corner and said, "No, he just died 2 months ago." But he said, "But we're going to have some programs in the fall or start, that we can study the teachings." So I went to the program, later in the fall, and I was introduced to dialogue there by the director of the foundation, Mark Lee, at the time. There was about 80 of us in this big room, and they said, "We're going to split up now into small groups of 10, and we're going to have a dialogue." And then he said, "And nobody's going to try to convince anybody of anything." And I was like shocked. Is that possible? I had been in some rather unpleasant business meetings where I was working, and I said, can you really not try to convince each other? So that was so we went into these small groups, and I don't know whether I should bother telling my first dialogue experience, but I guess I'll go ahead.
Yes, I'd love to hear that. But before you do, I Googled really quickly. Krishnamurti died in 1986. So do you recall, was that the same year you discovered this book by Krishnamurti? Because you mentioned...
No, it was probably it was either a year or a year and a half before then. Like, so in 85, I was started reading him, and then, later I realized, I can drive up to where he lives, but I missed him by 2 months.
Yeah, that's too bad. Yes, please do share your first dialogue experience.
Well, it was basically, so we went in this small group, and I'm really fascinated. What is this dialogue? As I reflect back on it, I was literally in this state of not knowing. I'm going, what is this? This sounds great, so I'm listening there, and it seems like some of these other people had, they were familiar with dialogue, so. But at a certain point, one of them would say to this other fellow, "Would you stop interrupting? You're interrupting." So they would go on, and then they'd mention it again. You're interrupting. So the question pops up in my head. Actually, this one lady, she said, "You're interrupting," and we were almost there. And I'm going, "Wow, where? Where are you getting to?" But I had, in the back of my head, I had heard Krishnamurti say something about observe yourself in relationship. And I'm going, well, isn't it really about this relationship with this fellow that's supposed to be disruptive? What's happening there that we think this fellow's a disruption? So anyway, so that was, and then we went back into the big room, all the groups, and they asked what went on. And pretty much every group said there was somebody disruptive in their group. So I guess to skip forward here now. So I kept going to these. Actually, I'll tell you my story. So the first year I'm there going, what is this? This is interesting. The second year I'm starting to go, I'm getting a kind of a feel for this, what dialogue is. In the third year, I'm kind of going like, maybe I can help other people understand what dialogue is. And then the fourth year, I'm kind of going, come on, everybody, get on board. You have to be together, all this. And then, like the fifth year, I was going, it doesn't matter what anybody else is doing in the group. I can observe myself in relationship. I don't need somebody else to do something. I can observe what's going on without expecting anything else to be different. So probably probably somewhere in that 5 years, I found out Bohm was giving seminars at the school.
So sorry, before we move to that subject, these 5 years of dialogue events that you attended were all put on by Krishnamurti Foundation America?
Yeah, it was biannual. They'd do one weekend. They're like Friday, Saturday, and Sunday meetings. And there was one in the spring and one in the fall each year.
Were you attending one or both on average?
Both of them, yeah. And I also found out early, probably that first weekend, that they had a Thursday night dialogue at the school every week. So I started attending those too. I would go up there every Thursday evening for the dialogue.
Where would you go up there from? How far away were you at the time?
I'm trying to remember if I was working. No, I was still working somewhere else from Simi Valley, which is it was like an hour and 5-minute drive to get there.
I see.
Then later on, I started working about halfway in between, and I would just come up after work.
You mentioned Mark Lee at the first one. Was he consistently at all of these? Was he one of the main organizers? Was he a facilitator?
Well, he was at all of the biannual ones, but he didn't attend the weekly night ones.
Right. Right. So before we move on to the Bohm seminar piece, what was your general impression of these? What did you observe at these? Did they show you a promise to dialogue? Did you see dialogue taking place? Did you see any changes in yourself or other people at these KFA dialogue sessions you attended over half a decade?
Yeah, I would. There was, think you would notice things, and you would have, I guess, what I would call like minor insights or something. Like at one of these weekly night dialogues, there was a couple that was pretty much regulars, and they actually had their own like Zen center. But this one meeting, they were kind of arguing with each other, and the husband kind of got up and stormed out. And, it seemed like half of the other participants were kind of on the male side, and the other half are on the wife's side. But somebody asked the wife, they said, "Why did you say that to him?" And her response was, "Well, I knew what he was going to say." Literally it was like I'm going, "Wow, I do that too." Or everybody does that. It was kind of a seeing of a cultural norm or something, and every once in a while somebody would say something about what thought's doing or how it acts or something, and you look at that and see something that you hadn't noticed about it, so yeah, there was a lot of like what seemed to be minor insights, going on.
And how much of that dialogue time was spent discussing Krishnamurti's direct proposals? How much was spent of kind of people talking about their own observations into thought?
Well, the interesting thing is I don't think they ever used any quotes or anything like that. They just kind of, but it was looking at his teachings, but it wasn't continually referring back to Krishnamurti or something. We were actually looking at something that he had said. In fact, I had another, over the years that actually Mark Lee was, replaced by another fellow. I don't know if we need to include this, but seemed like the KFA would want someone who was a better fundraiser, who was the director for a while, and then he left, and then Mark Lee came back, and he was more like focused on the teachings, but anyways, and there was also a few different facilitators over the years. And I had another dialogue experience a number of years later where the facilitator said, "Well, thought's a problem." And I said, "Well, how do you know that?" And then she referred to a Krishnamurti quote or something. And I said, "How do you know that?" To see, because, to go into it, but actually this got interrupted by some of my friends that told me I wasn't listening. And it was a funny exchange. I said, "Well, how do you know that?" or something. "Are you privy to inside my head here or something?" And she said, "No, you leaned forward," and I go, "Oh, okay." But and later on, this was interesting in a sense to me, because later on, there's this notion of go slower. You need to, leave some space or something, and it's kind of led to this question that I'll ask. Well, how long does it take to see something? I mean, if you're looking at something, does it really take time? But I found somewhere in I came across in his Krishnamurti's teaching somewhere where he pointed out, when you get used to this observation, and looking, it begins to move faster and faster and faster. That you initially were so unaccustomed to being aware of the movement of thought and just looking rather than interpreting. But when that becomes more like your natural state or something, it becomes like effortless and moves faster.
I find this question fascinating because, if I had a box and there's some object inside, we could look and everyone could see, oh, it's a red ball.
Mm-hmm.
But, why is it that when it comes to looking at thought, it doesn't seem to have that ease of viewing?
Mm-hmm.
You're foreshadowing some of the kind of difficulties or problems that arise in the dialogue sessions, which I hope we'll get into a
Yeah.
fair bit later on, because I think a lot of people are interested in that and your experience with that. Because as you'll hear later in this podcast, starting in, I guess this is 1986, but going on to today, I can't even imagine the total number of dialogue sessions you've participated in, Howard.
Yep. Yeah, I can't either. Like there.
Yes. And I didn't realize how extensively before you attended the Bohm seminars you were attending these events at the KFA. You mentioned the weekly ones too. Was that with students present?
It was mostly like some some of the teachers from the school, like and then apparently a few from that were like staff too. And actually back then, the staff center for the KFA was just right around the corner from the school. That probably made it easier than when they moved the Krishnamurti Center over to the other side of the of the city.
And do you remember the kind of sentiment at those meetings? Like these schools were a new experiment, a new attempt to, support a human being in a very different way that's done commonly in the, common culture. How do you remember the kind of the sentiment, how it was going, the kind of, things that were talked about in those weekly dialogues with teachers and staff?
Well, it was. I mean, it was always about Krishnamurti's teaching, and it was quite pleasant. But around that time, like there was also a lot of people, like having their own dialogues at their house and stuff, and then some of the other ones weren't, had more, disruptive people, as they were called, but. My memory of them is quite pleasant or something, but, that my brain may be filtering out any of the stuff that's not pleasant.
Do you remember the sentiment towards the whole experiment? Did people feel it was going well? Did people feel it was very challenging? Did people feel it wasn't going well?
For some reason, I don't feel like that was so much the early, times of that. It seems like as the time went on, then people started going, this is a waste of time. Like a lot of my early friends that I met there, and like one of them was the lady that was in the bookstore. When I went up there, and she became one of my longest time friends. And a lot of these people just gave up after a few years. They said, well, that's not working. It's same old stuff. Everybody says the same thing. So. But like I said, probably by that time, I had seen that I really didn't have to, the dialogue, it didn't have to go in any particular way for me to be observing what was going on. Because I think that, the people that kind of bailed out, are saying, well, nothing's happening, nothing's changed, nobody's changed. They're, but they would also say, I don't get it either, but anyways, I don't think it became, I think people were really enthused by it initially, but as a few years went on, a lot of people felt like it wasn't going anywhere.
Yeah, thank you for that. And again, this sounds like this was roughly 1986 to 1990, 1991-ish.
Yeah.
So you mentioned the Bohm seminars. How did you hear about them, and do you remember the year of the first one you attended?
Yes. So I missed I'm not even sure exactly what happened in 1986. I know he did something. I don't even know. I'm not sure that it was at the school or not, but I didn't hear about it until I missed 1987, but a friend from those same, from the Krishnamurti, biannual, events told me, he asked me, are you going to the Bohm seminar? And I said, is there one? So I found out about it, and then I signed up. And when I got there, they had these booklets, a transcript of the prior year. So I bought the 1987 transcript and was making all my notes in that on the 1988 one. So through 88 through, I think I only went to one of the two. They were always November and December, and I think I just went to one of them because I figured that the other one was going to be probably fairly similar. But I felt each year might be a little bit different, which they were, to some extent. But so I went from 88 through 92. And then actually the year after, they did another, seminar, but without David, but Cyril, his wife, was there, and the four people that that kind of were running it, like Lee Nickel and Joe Zorski and what's his name, David Moody, and I always forget the fourth one.
Yes, we have that written down somewhere. So did you attend the 93 one with Bohm absent as well?
Yeah, with Cyril Bohm, yeah, and them. Yeah, I went to that too.
So that one from 88, what was it like? What was the atmosphere? How many people were there?
Well, it was it wasn't 80 people, but it was probably around 50. Because what I remember, is like I found out recently. I think it was actually Mark Lee told it to me that the optional dialogue day on a Monday after the weekend, the seminar, Bohm only did it once or something, and I guess I was lucky enough to go to that. I'm figuring, and it seemed like pretty much everyone that was in the seminar from Friday, Saturday, and Sunday went to the dialogue, and there was like 46 of us, but maybe there was a few more than that. So maybe there was probably like 50 in the room for most of these seminars.
And how would it start?
Well, Bohm, opening up with an introduction, and then, and he sometimes mentioned, we probably went over some of this last year, but I'm going to still open it up and just, so he would just open it up and then, and talk for a while, and then invite, periodically would invite questions, and especially like after we'd take a break and then come back in, he would ask again, if any questions came up for anybody, but most of it, he was talking most of the time. Yeah.
I imagine you read some Bohm's work before attending the dialogue. You mentioned you had the previous transcript of the talk before. Had you read any of his other works?
I imagine so. I haven't actually looked at that or something, but I must have probably, bought, I know I had early books, like Unfolding Meaning, Wholeness, and Implicate Order, and but I'm not sure the dates, on that, when I actually did that, and and of course, Ending of Time was available, and given that I pretty much bought every Krishnamurti book I could find, I imagine I picked up that one.
Yeah, that's fair. And do you remember? Was there a difference hearing Bohm live as opposed to reading his past material?
Well, I mean, what I noticed about him was how, mild mannered and kind and, quiet he was. But then, of course, everything he was saying, again, the way he answered questions and stuff was, it's just, mind boggling how sharp his mind was, and I didn't ever really actually only talk to him one time when we went up to the snack table, they said hi to each other or something like that. But I didn't spend any time with him one-on-one or something.
Right. And how long would a session go on for?
Well, it was, I was trying to remember if we started at like 9 or something, but like an hour and a half or something, and they'd take a short break and then go on for another hour or so, and then there'd be a lunch break, and then same kind of thing in the afternoon, like for a hour and a half, and then break, and then another hour and a half.
One of the things Bohm would talk about is kind of the importance of people really examining the things he was pointing to, kind of a necessity in looking at these things, of people getting together and actually addressing the root cause of these, problems of humanity, as we sometimes call them. Mm-hmm. Was there that element in these meetings where people kind of enthusiastic about taking these proposals and doing something with them, with getting together? Mm-hmm. Or did it more kind of people would find the seminar very interesting, but it would just kind of disband for another year?
Yeah, I don't, I mean, probably, like some of that creeped into the other, Krishnamurti dialogues, let's say, or something. But, the, I never came across any of them that were like the groups from the seminars getting together. Although, there were a couple of, actually one of the groups that was formed, it was not in a different part of town, down in Santa Monica, like down in east of or west of LA. There was apparently a number of different groups that were formed out of people that met at the seminars. And one of the groups that I was attending in Santa Monica, was formed out of people that had gone to the Bohm seminar. But the dialogues were still more like about Krishnamurti's work and not so much like studying what Bohm had said. But
right, and you had that half a decade of experience with dialogue from the Krishnamurti Foundation and your own direct experience with it.
Mm-hmm.
Did attending these Ojai seminars change your view of dialogue, change your approach to it, change your lived experience of it?
Well, I was still pretty enthused on this, so I actually, started a couple of groups up and down in LA, and then I still kept attending the weekly dialogues for, I think, all the way up through up into the 90s. Then I'd stopped going up to Ojai as much, and had created a couple of groups down in the LA area.
Those groups in LA, if you had to guess, what year would you say you started those?
Probably the mid-90s, I'd say.
Mid-90s, gotcha. And the last kind of Bohm seminar without Bohm was 93.
Mm-hmm.
And you mentioned at one of these and one alone, there was an attempt at an actual dialogue session. You happened to be present for that. Could you describe your experience with that particular dialogue session?
Yeah, the way that I recall it is the first thing was I was, by this time, I guess a little background. By this time, I had read, like Bohm's views on dialogue, and one of the things that he said is you need to have this large group of 40 people. So for a while I was trying to, start a large group, and this is where I began to see, how difficult it would be to get more than, say, once you get over 10 people, or, it starts to get more chaotic, let's say, and the idea of having 40 people in a dialogue was, I gave up that idea fairly quick when I realized that that kind of group would require, a lot of serious people committed to doing this, continually for quite a time. And with new people coming in all the time, that's like literally impossible. So anyways, back to the optional day of dialogue. So pretty much, like I said, there was like 46 of us in this room, and what initially, like people, somebody would say something, and pretty much everybody would look over to Bohm and see what he was going to say. So, but pretty quickly, people, I think, noticed he wasn't going to play into that. He stayed out of being a facilitator or a controller. But the reason why I think the dialogue was able to work for somewhat is because this whole group had just spent, Friday evening, Saturday, and Sunday listening to Bohm and asking questions and looking. So when they got to Monday, they were. It seems like everybody was somewhat in this listening mode, so. But after a while, it did get into like some polarization, and what I remember about it, there was so much energy in the room of with all these people. I literally had the felt sense. I could feel that this was the microcosm of the macrocosm. Which kind of revealed to me why one of the reasons that Bohm wanted to have large groups, because you literally can feel that that this movement that's happening in the room is what's happening in the whole world. So, and I think, again, I think the reason why it was that you could feel it was because of having all of this energy in the room. So that's my recollection of that group. I don't remember the topic that we had, but he didn't present a topic. It was just putting people in a room, and at some point somebody brings something up, and then they move into it. Yeah.
But you mentioned this very simple notion of people getting together and observing together, looking together, rather than relying on the responsive memory, the responsive thought and knowledge. Now, it seems to me it would be a very radical thing if people got together and were able to just look together. And to some extent, that seems to be part of Bohm and Krishnamurti's general project. In the common culture, a certain activity is going on, but in a microcosm, if some of us could get together and really act more from perception, observation, rather than from knowledge, thought, memory, that in of itself would be a very different set of activity going on. And I believe to some extent you could argue this was attempted in both the Krishnamurti schools, the dialogue groups, the study centers. I'm going to tie this into dialogue more generally. Some people feel, even some people who are part of the original organizers of the kind of Bohm Ojai seminars, I'm pretty sure I heard one of them say they feel it's been a failed experiment. Others say quite the opposite, that we've just scratched the surface. We've barely begun this experiment. And this problem of communication arises whenever human beings get together. So this is an incredibly viable path to go down because we have to face the problem of communication. And have you heard of a better vision to face the problems of communication? So what's your general take on this whole thing? Does dialogue have a deep promise to support human culture going in a coherent and good direction? Does it have a promise to help us explore the root cause of humanity's problems, the origins of human conflict? Is it a failed experiment? What's your take on it?
Well, I always go with my own personal direct experience, which is it's radically changed, my life, and there have been, actually I would say there was that one major insight into what I would describe as a direct seeing of the limited nature of thought. And that, so what I'm saying, and that happened in a dialogue group. And so my own direct experience is that, this shift in consciousness can occur with an insight into the nature of thought. So, and again, that happened in dialogue. So regardless of how challenging it seems to be for people to, do what you were just pointing to come in and to be really open to observing and listening, as challenging as that generally seems to be for the general populace, there is that possibility if it seems like, again, because of how ingrained the conditioning is, there has to be an incredible seriousness. And even one of the thoughts that comes up for me is you have to be willing to be uncomfortable, and it has to be like, essentially, it seems like it has to be like the central thing in your life to really get at the root of this. I mean, otherwise it seems like it's not up to the task of breaking through this conditioned patterns.
Unfortunately, that is the appearance to me as well. And I say unfortunately because I wish it was a bit of an easier thing. I wish it was just something that anyone could just pick up. And, you never want to be elitist or exclusionary, but at the same time, there are certain activities that take a degree of seriousness in order for you to be able for them to work. Mm-hmm. Anyone could say, I like quantum physics, but to become a quantum physicist is not you have years of schooling, effort, sustained interest, reading, and I'm not trying to say this is equivalent, but I'm just using that as an example. I feel like this is something where if you're just toying with it, you're just playing with it, you're just flirting with it, probably not much will result from it. It's not going to do harm to you. You might feel a bit more peaceful. You might have some nice ideas to repeat to others, but it can stay at the intellectual level quite easily. And that is one complaint, I will say from my own direct experience, that often this seems like an intellectual affair with no significant change in behavior of the participants sometimes. And I know other people have run dialogue groups, and Some describe them going well, others describe a lot of difficulties. Can you kind of talk about the variation of what you've seen, what you think is a kind of fair expectation of the process?
I had recently I have a lot of Zoom dialogues that I do. And one of the last ones was just people were bringing in, Advaita things and, Course in Miracle things. And just, it was an awful dialogue. But I didn't want to reject people or anything like that. I think this is something that we all, could benefit from, learning about ourselves, so. But so I do this at a lot of, whenever I'm at a dialogue and I see anyone that I ask people often, have you ever experienced dialogue? So if they haven't, I will often, read a quote or two from Krishnamurti, and I'll just read this one quote that I used last night. So he said, "To take such a journey, we must travel light. We cannot be burdened with opinions, prejudices, and conclusions. All that old furniture we have collected for the last 2,000 years and more. Forget all you know about yourself. Forget all you have ever thought about yourself. We're going to start as if we knew nothing." So I use quotes like that to try to invite people to, not as a rule, but to look and see, okay, I mean, this is the invitation of the dialogues I'm doing is, okay, you read a lot of stuff, but let's get at the root. Let's see for ourselves. Let's observe what's actually going on in us. And you can't do that if your mind's, caught up in knowing. If you're see, what I think generally happens in most people's consciousness is they think they're listening and looking, but they're literally translating, what they're hearing to see if it matches up with their background or what they think is true or false. It's being filtered through the belief and opinion structure. No, that's right. No, I don't know. That's wrong. Because we literally think that this content that we have is truth. So there isn't this just listening in a way that you really want to see what the other person's words are pointing to. You want to see, not to just latch on to a verbal description. That's what words are literally for, is to point to something. And in general, like when you mentioned the red ball, we could see the red ball or something. We're talking about human consciousness. So if there's an observation of this movement of thought and consciousness, it's pretty much doing the same kind of thing that in every brain. I mean, so we should be able to observe what thought's doing in what we call our brain, and I suggest it'll reveal the processing, and the thought forms that are in pretty much every brain.
That sounds like a very reasonable proposal. And it seems like, Bohm's vision of dialogue, Krishnamurti's vision of dialogue, these have both been around for a significant period of time. And it really feels to me like this experiment hasn't been attempted sufficiently. I feel like, I think I used the word scratching the surface. I still feel like we're there. These are very new. If you look at human history, we just got these, and a handful of people have tried them, and we've seen some fail and some produce very interesting effects. And then I imagine if there's actually a physical center, a place where people were deadly serious about this, they might even be able to take it to a different level. Now, Howard, I realize it's 2025, so next year will be 2026. That would be 40 years of doing dialogue for you, starting in 86.
Yeah.
I did the math right.
Yeah.
And I know you have dialogue groups now, a variety of them. Some you operate on your own, some other people. Some, I believe, are associated with the Krishnamurti Foundation America. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah. Right.
So 4 decades of doing dialogue, I imagine you wouldn't have continued with it if you didn't see a kind of value in doing so. Is there any particular advice or guidance you would give to someone wanting to get into dialogue, but they may or may not have people in their area that share that interest?
It would be beneficial, to, if you have some friends that are, interested in doing this with you or something. I've tried to help people start dialogues. I almost helped a couple of people in the Phoenix area, get one going, but enough people didn't keep showing up. But at the KFA, people will come in and I always ask, where are you coming from? So when I find somebody in an area, and I try to get them to get together and start their own group or something. But it's like I agree perfectly with Bohm saying that you need to have either the first couple of sessions, looking at the nature of dialogue together, or even, there's the other more controversial one of have someone that's actually familiar with it be there, or, I guess Bohm said, to have a seminar, or with someone who actually understands the process to some significant degree, which you would still probably use, Bohm's, like pointers if you're going to do a Bohm dialogue. I have a few different lists that I've made, with regard to Bohm's pointers about dialogue. So, but there's, in the Krishnamurti circle, there's always a resistance to this notion of somebody might know more than somebody else. And that's a good skepticism in the sense of when you really go into this, it isn't really about knowledge. It's about seeing and observation and, observing how life actually does what it does versus the story that we store about that seeing. I think over time we've kind of forgotten that when you learn through observation and listening and your senses essentially, and then thought makes a narrative about whatever was learned, and then we give extreme importance to that narrative about something which wasn't the actual seeing or learning. But so I would, as far as like starting a group or doing, I guess one other thing I want to say is I have yet to find any better way for people to learn about themselves and observe the nature of the conditioning that we have outside of dialogue, because even if somebody has a bigger platform like Jim Carrey or something, and he starts talking about, wholeness or something, it's still just at the level of, intellectual. It has to be seen directly. And that's to me that's always the challenge. The seeing versus interpreting it. Evaluating what you're seeing, but the option is there for any human brain that's not damaged. Just observe.
And how would you respond to kind of the sentiment that came out later on, where I think it was Lee Nichols' article where he said Bohm felt people weren't doing enough work outside of dialogue. And it's also kind of my contention with the vision of dialogue, which obviously it's an experiment that interests me deeply, but also there's something, it's like school. It's like in school, you go to this place and you're supposed to learn there, but then you step outside of school and you're in life. And, it's a bit of an artificial construct. In the same way, I feel like you could say with dialogue, there's some element of that. You're getting together intentionally for a period of time, but you're spending a minority of your time in this dialogue group. So obviously, there's great importance to what you do outside of the dialogue group. So how would you kind of respond to that, question of, will dialogue work if people aren't engaging in a serious activity outside the dialogue group? What do people have to do outside the dialogue group? Should there even be a difference between kind of the fundamental activity inside and outside of dialogue?
Well, I would definitely say it's helpful to do it, to be aware of what's going on with thought in relationship, essentially all the time. But what was coming up for me, so I work at the KFA, 3 days a week, and they sometimes have resident scholars there, young people that come to just study the teachings, and sometimes they just study on their own, okay, and they don't bother coming to. We have Wednesday night dialogues and Saturday dialogues, and they often don't come to them. And when I talk to them about this, I suggest this is where, when you need to do both. You need to be observing yourself outside of dialogue, and like you said, you need to do the homework. If you're serious about this, you'll do it. But if you're not serious, it would just be like a hobby or part-time. But in the dialogue is where, that's one of the things that came up from Bohm was, that we all have like assumptions that are sort of stored in the brain as absolutely true, unquestionable. They're just, so we have those kind of ideas that they never come up to be questioned because they're assumed to be unquestionable. And in a dialogue, so if you're just by yourself and you're not in a dialogue, you're not likely to ever question that. So, but if you're together with other people, someone will often say something that it directly conflicts with one of those assumed ideas, and so it brings it up into awareness. And after I looked at that, I had also tried to, with another friend, to start a dialogue with a Green Party, group or something, like a political party. And in that one there, one of the fellows said, capitalism is the best system there is. It's just try to give you, it's not the best ones, but somebody else in the group, took issue with that, just like Bohm's examples of, like the Zionism stuff or those early dialogues that he had, and someone would say something critical about Zionism, but the person that's really feels Zionism is, the central thing for them, they don't question it. They're not going to question it outside of a dialogue group where somebody else might question it. So I think both are essential. I agree with Bohm that, but if you're not really doing it as a lifestyle, then you're not real serious about it.
I like those examples. It seems in the current culture, the ability for people who disagree with each other to listen to each other and communicate with each other civilly, at least in my 4+ decades on the planet, seems to have degenerated. I don't know if that's your view as well or not, but it concerns me that people with different views are unable to communicate with each other, because we've seen historically when people don't communicate, then it just gets worse and worse, and usually leads to violence or something else drastic.
Yeah. And actually, Bohm and Kay, one of their last conversations was the future of humanity. And they're talking about we're headed towards catastrophe unless we have a change in consciousness. So I had this notion that maybe with dialogue that, I could play some small part in preventing a collapse. Because basically this notion was, I was also looking at human nature and seeing that pretty much humans will avoid changing until some sort of painful thing happens where, that's kind of forces them to look at what's going on. Otherwise, if they're feeling okay, they just don't bother, looking at this. So I noticed that, dialogue was a way to observe what's going on now instead of waiting until things get so awful that it forces you to look at it. So, but as of recently, I was looking around and I've come to the conclusion that a collapse is coming, whether we like it or not. And so I downgraded my expectations to perhaps I can play a small part in helping people learn to cooperate, which is what, if you can see the falseness of this self-center, and see that, no, we are literally all in this together, then you can, then we can cooperate instead of shooting each other whenever the resources get short. But to go over to the Bohm's example of the indigenous group of the anthropologist was observing, about this group comes together and, and just talks and talks and talks until they've pretty much everybody apparently understands what's going on, what everybody else is doing, and then they disband and go back to their everyday life. And a friend asked me about that, what's the difference between the Bohm dialogues or K dialogues that we do and that? And to me, we're so conflicted, like I think you pointed out before, we're so attached to, I don't really think that's the best word because it implies that there's an I that's attached, but we're giving so much significance to these beliefs and opinions that we have that we find it difficult to come together and actually listen to each other. So I like Bohm's example of that's what dialogue could be, but it seems to me until we see that the nature of this divisive self-centeredness, like what Bohm called self-worldview, and see that it really isn't something important. It's actually rather poisonous and divisive, so we won't be able to, in general, come together, and have that kind of listening and talking to each other. I would suggest that the tribe or the group that he was observing, they saw themselves as together, not as adversaries, but but we grow up in this culture that's all about competition rather than cooperation, so we see each other as adversaries, so I don't, well, as you can, I'm sure your experience reflects the same thing. It's hard to get any kind of group together and actually have people listen to each other.
Yes, and like you said, if the participants aren't serious, well, it's funny. Sometimes people stay around because it's just a pleasant, hey, we get to talk. It's like the same reason someone might go to, philosophy meetup group and just,
Mm-hmm.
I want to share my knowledge. I want to talk. So sometimes you get a group that doesn't really get uncomfortable, doesn't really challenge each other's assumptions and beliefs,
Mm-hmm.
and kind of stays on a more pleasant level. And it's a kind of pleasant way to pass the time, but it remains very intellectual and not much is happening.
Mm-hmm.
Other times you get that a lot of conflict and disagreement and confusion. Are we doing dialogue? What's dialogue? Is this dialogue? Is this allowed in dialogue? What's thought? And then it doesn't seem to move beyond there easily. And then people get bored just being stuck in that place.
Mm-hmm.
Then sometimes you have that flow where, like you said, people are just actually observing and perceiving rather than relying on their memories. And that's such a beautiful quality.
Yeah.
Like, and you can kind of recognize it and feel it when it's present. And I've seen it enough times that I don't know how far dialogue can go or how supportive it can be, but to me, it seems like an unavoidable proposal. If you get human beings together, they're going to have to communicate. In the present state, there's a lot of difficulties that arise in communication. And you really have to observe these difficulties as they arrive to understand them. You can't just reflect and think about them, but you have to have that, like you said very early on, you have to see and understand the problem for yourself directly through perception. But when people actually do this, it does seem to be a different quality. I think, for example, when we have our board meetings, even though we're not attempting dialogue, it's a very different kind of communication where we can absolutely challenge each other to our face and there's no animosity.
Mm-hmm.
And there's this kind of desire to learn and see and perceive what actually is the case. But I don't know how far that can go because it feels like, again, it's hard to get serious people together, especially in a local area, sustain that for a significant period of time. But I know we're not going to stop going down this path. It's a direction that we continue to want to seriously explore and document and hopefully even get some participation from the scientific community to help us rigorously look at what's going on in the dialogue group. Something I imagine you're going to continue for as long as you're able to.
I do have thoughts that come up, of like, do I really want to keep doing this? But it just keeps going. It doesn't. Essentially, I don't see anything that's more important. But I was going to mention, as far as the seriousness goes, I have the sense, this is just a proposal I'm making that to really be serious, I think you have to see to some degree, more than just your own personal life. You have to see the what's happening around you, and because things like like if you see if you learn that like that we're headed for difficulties, but you're doing okay, and you have no, but then it sometimes isn't enough to get you to look at something. But if you had kids, say, like you become, well, what's the world gonna be like for my kids? Or if you care about this, what's happening in Gaza or something like that, it seems like you have to have some degree of concern for what's going on around you, and not just your own personal desires. I also feel that's again that the seriousness is unlikely if you're not somewhat attentive to what humanity's doing.
I feel like perhaps in the past it was more natural to have that sense of kind of we're a caretaker of the earth, that we're responsible, for the earth and the people on it. And this modern world has created very different individualistic ways of thinking.
I want to add, I think that, this is one of the reasons why, Krishnamurti and probably Bohm were emphasizing this contact with nature. That's where you, I guess, can get in touch with what's called the sacred or something, and wanting feeling the necessity to preserve this or something, that's one of the problems of, how we've all moved into cities and sort of isolated ourselves from nature and cut ourselves off from life in some sense.
Yeah, that's a whole nother subject that actually I want to have a podcast on. Just that particular subject. I think it would be quite interesting, and I think there'd be a lot of different people who would have meritful things to say in that area, obviously including Bohm and Krishnamurti. And interestingly, from my more recent conversations with Lee Nichol, this is also a direction he's very much exploring, this question of, can we have thought perception or thought sense if we don't have strong body perception or body sense? And obviously, people who lived in nature previously had a much stronger connection and relationship to it.
Mm-hmm.
Probably a very natural and inevitable one. Well, I'm very grateful for your time today, Howard, and sharing your experience. And I'm sure we'll talk again in a future podcast on similar or maybe different subjects. But I very much appreciated speaking with you today. And thank you to our audience for listening. This podcast can be found on all major platforms, including Apple and Spotify. And again, we do hope to release episodes more frequently. It's just we have a lot of work and few people. Have a good day, everyone.